of the so-called Arab Spring, which has generally been encouraged in the West as a supposedly genuine democratic movement. Something similar happened with the Arab media. At first, it was stressed in Western circles that there should be more freedom of expression in the Arab world, in the Arab media. At the time, Al Jazeera television in Qatar was the first to fill the existing gap by providing free and critical reporting and discussions unprecedented. But once Al Jazeera started reporting in a critical way about the American invasion in Iraq in 2003 and afterwards, its broadcasts were not that welcome anymore, and Al Jazeera was accused of being partisan and not objective. Even worse, the Americans during their invasion in Iraq bombed Al Jazeera's office in Baghdad and killed its bureau chief. Once Al Jazeera started broadcasting messages from bin Laden, broadcasts which were repeated by many other television stations all over the world, it was branded as a channel supporting terrorists. From previous experiences, the conclusion can be drawn that politicians in the West generally do indeed want to see democracy and democratic elections in the Islamic world, albeit that when the victorious parties happen to be Islamic oriented, they are not only not enthusiastic about the outcome, but they even tend to reject the results, because that is not something they generally expect or want. In the West, people more often than not expect like-minded people to win the elections, much more than people with quite different views, let alone Muslim fundamentalists. So in other words, Western countries want democracy and freedom of expression, but not when this results in something they do not like. One of the reasons for this rejection is the expectation that the Islamic forces which come to power through the democratic system may turn out to misuse the same system so as to later impose their rule undemocratically. This in turn is based on the presumption that Islam and democracy are incompatible. In some cases, the expectations of misusing the democratic system may be quite justified, but in other cases they are unfounded. It just depends on which Islamic-oriented group one takes as an example. Some Islamic groups are clearly democratically oriented, like for instance the biggest Muslim organizations in Indonesia, like Muhammadiyah and the Nahdlatul Ulama, who represent a large part of the Indonesian Muslim population. Whereas other, much smaller movements, like the now splintered Jama'ah Islamiyah or the Hizb ut-Tahrir, are undemocratically oriented, in my opinion. They want to use or misuse the democratic system to achieve their undemocratic aims. In fact, the success in adopting democracy as a political system has much more to do with the supportive attitude of the people than with the religion. In Europe, we have had the example of the Nazis in Germany who came to power thanks to the democratic system. Once elected into the seat of power, they violated the democratic principles to the utmost limits and developed into one of the most terrible dictatorships. But this had nothing to do with religion, but just with power politics. Within this context, it can be relevant to make clear and explain what is related to Islam and what not, or what is not related to religion in general, but rather to other factors such as politics, culture, and local traditions, or to explain how Islam can also be compatible with 21st century society and today's modern standards. In doing so, we can not only help contribute to bridge misunderstandings and to correct wrong perceptions, we can also help create a better social and political climate which encourages mutual respect and tolerance. Islam, as we all know, is a hot topic both in the West and also in the Islamic world itself. Many people talk about it, but much fewer people are knowledgeable about it. If you want to organize a seminar, and I said this also in the seminar in Samarang, which was attended by Professor Aziomardi, if you want to organize a seminar on democracy in the Middle East or Asia, it may not be that easy to raise funds for it. But if you add the word Islam and make it about the role of democracy and Islam in the Middle East and Asia, the chances become much better. And it may also attract many more interested people. This is because many people are sometimes focused on Islam to such an extent that the danger exists that Islam becomes a kind of fixation. A similar fixation can sometimes be found with respect to democracy as an ideology. At present, democracy has become a central key word in many political discussions about the Arab and Islamic world. Such a fixation about Islam may add to misunderstandings between Muslims and non-Muslims, or between so-called Muslim countries and non-Muslim countries, and sometimes even within Muslim societies themselves. By overstressing the factor of Islam, a kind of polarization may be stimulated, exactly there where we do not want such a polarization. It is as if people talk themselves into it. So whereas certain basic principles of Islam are the same everywhere, it is obvious that there are also quite a lot of differences amongst Islamic communities all over the Islamic world. These are more often than not simply and mainly related to regional and cultural diversities. And these diversities are not necessarily related to Islam itself. There are various things which have little or nothing to do with Islam as a religion, but are nevertheless ascribed to it because the persons who are linked to it, happen to be Muslims. This has contributed to a lot of misunderstandings. In addition, there are politicians and other people who on purpose try to even further stimulate hostile views of Islam and Muslim countries, simply because this suits their political aims. The Dutch Party for Freedom of Geert Wilders is an example in this respect. Not many people in the West have had the privilege of having intensive and direct contact with the Islamic world and its rich civilizations. Many have never even been to the Arab or Islamic world, but have only obtained their impressions of Islam and Muslims through the mass media, quite often in a rather distorted way, or through their contacts with poorly educated Muslim immigrant neighbors who happen to be living next door, but who in general only represent a particular social layer or a certain region, or certain regions in their countries of origin. In several cases, Muslim immigrants in Europe might not even be seen as generally representative by their own fellow citizens in their countries of origin. Many people in the West also obtained their ideas about Islam through extreme events, such as the 11th of September, terrorist attacks in the United States or those elsewhere. Often such experiences or impressions have been more negative than positive. It is not Islam as such which is being perceived, but rather the acts of individual Muslims or small groups who pretend to act in the name of Islam, but do not in any way represent any substantial Muslim majority. Or it is about contacts with people from other parts of the world who have a different culture and different civilization, people who at the same time just happen to be Muslims as well. It is, I think, very important for the more moderate Islamic parties to let their voices and views being heard clearer and louder, so as to help correcting or shattering the false image of Islam, which prevails among many people and in some parts of the world, particularly in the West. And one of these false images is that Islam and democracy are incompatible. On the other hand, it is high time for people in the West to listen attentively, not dismissively, to the moderate and democratic voices in the Islamic world, and to view the Islamic world and Muslims in general in a more realistic way, a way which is based on facts, not on fiction. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.